Take me out to the ground. Buy me some peanuts and some Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back.
So for all of our talk about ballpark figures this week, we've resisted the urge to share too many baseball statistics. But thanks to the folks at Business Insider Magazine, here's something to take with you the next time you head off for the game. A guide to what a small beer is going to cost you at the ballpark. We'll start with the good news. The Arizona Diamondbacks, the Cleveland Indians, a measly $4. The good news, too, if you're a little thirsty and find yourself at the Angels or the Rangers in Texas, the Padres, the A's, the Tigers, or the Cardinals of St. Louis, or under some Florida sunshine at the Rays, a beer here is $5. But it starts to look a little nasty in San Francisco. Sure, the setting is great, but
Okay, yeah, I can hear you now. I couldn't hear you because the tuner was on. Okay, so from Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Teresa Avila. Do you want me to... From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Teresa Avila. Mayor Bill de Blasio's office announced today that the city has raised $125,000 in aid for victims from last month's explosion and fire in the East Village. The apparent gas explosion killed 2 people and destroyed 3 buildings. Small businesses along 2nd Avenue will get a boost this Saturday as part of a campaign to get shoppers back to the area affected by the blast.
Familiarize yourself with
A woman from the Bronx pleaded not guilty today to felony charges alleging she had 10 fake marriages as part of an immigration scam. Prosecutors said the 39-year-old Liana Barrientos received payments after marrying the men so they could gain legal immigration status in the U.S. The marriages occurred over an 11-year period and included 7 grooms from countries red-flagged by the Department of Homeland Security, including Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, Georgia, and Mali. If convicted, Barrientos faces up to 4 years in prison. A felony officer from upstate Fort Drum is set to make history. Captain Michelle Kelly will participate in training through the military's Ranger School. The opportunity comes after the military decided in 2012 to lift its ban of women in combat roles. She will be one of 12 women who have qualified for the elite training that begins later this... I can hear you. So what are the cues again? Again for me to go? What are the cues for me?
This is mic up. Point is go.
Okay, how do I make sure that I don't run over?
I'm just going to time you on my phone. That's what I did, and I'll stop it for you because my mic's not going to be on.
Okay, can you give me like a... Remind me if I lose track, just like a...
Yeah.
5
Do you want
sec.
me to get you at 1:55? I'll be...
It's Friday, April 10th, and you're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Anjali Sastry.
And I'm Alistair Gardiner. A group of New Yorkers is planning a protest against the killing of Walter Scott, the black man shot by a white police officer in South Carolina last week.
Just to see this happening over and over again, it just creates more pain, because it's like it never ends.
A new approach could prevent kids from having allergic reactions to peanuts.
We are essentially preventing the development of an allergy by a very simple intervention.
Wildlife experts say that a new kind of ladder for fish on the Bronx River will save an endangered herring.
This will be the first time that they can get up over this dam in 400 years.
Also coming up, orders are in for the new Apple Watch, binge drinking in the brain, and political corruption in New Jersey. This and more after this news.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Hillary Rodham Clinton is expected to end months of speculation this Sunday and formally announce her candidacy for president. Sources familiar with the former Secretary of State's plans say she will confirm her intentions via social media, then start campaigning in early voting states. The impending announcement's already drawing fire out of the National Rifle Association conference in Nashville. Executive Vice President Wayne LaPierre says Democrats will suffer from not having a competitive primary process to select their nominee.
From a coronation, you don't get the best for America or even the best for the Democratic Party. What you get instead is Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Clinton was a first lady and a U.S. senator, then ran against President Obama in 2008. The Justice Department has charged a Kansas man with attempting to detonate a car bomb at the Fort Riley military base. NPR's Carrie Johnson reports the FBI had monitored the alleged suicide plot for months.
Court papers say John Booker told his friends that becoming a martyr for the self-declared Islamic State became his #1 aspiration. The FBI says its agents watched Booker, who's 20 years old, purchase components for his bomb, record a propaganda video, and rent a storage locker. Justice Department officials say the public in the base at Fort Riley were never in any danger, and they made sure that Booker's alleged bomb was inert. The Kansas case is the latest in a series of prosecutions of Americans who allegedly aligned themselves with violent extremists and either travel overseas to fight or try to mount attacks on U.S. soil. National security officials say they're working hard to identify and bring those people to justice. Carrie Johnson, NPR News, Washington.
More suicide attacks reported out of eastern Afghanistan today, and the Taliban say they're behind them. Local authorities say 4 people have been killed. General Electric, the manufacturing behemoth that's also the nation's 7th largest bank, has decided to shed most of its finance business, GE Capital, which has $500 billion in assets. NPR's John Itzy reports a move is aimed at streamlining GE's business, but it'll also mean that GE can avoid significant regulation instituted following the financial crisis.
GE's financial arm is so huge that federal regulators had designated it a systemically important financial institution, meaning they feared it could severely damage the financial system if it got in trouble. That label meant more regulation. As part of the new strategy, GE said it will sell $26.5 billion worth of office buildings and commercial real estate debt to Blackstone Group. It's also planning to spin off its private label credit cards and retail finance business to form a separate company called Synchrony Financial. GE will hang on to its aircraft leasing business and financing arms that support its industrial operations. John Itzy, NPR News, Washington.
From Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Teresa Avila. Mayor Bill de Blasio's office announced today that the city has raised $125,000 in aid for victims from last month's explosion and fire in the East Village. The apparent gas explosion killed 2 people and destroyed 3 buildings. Small businesses along 2nd Avenue will get a boost this Saturday as part of a campaign to get shoppers back to the area affected by the blast. A woman from the Bronx pleaded not guilty today to felony charges alleging she had 10 fake marriages as part of an immigration scam. Prosecutors said the 39-year-old Liana Barrientos received payments after marrying the men so they could gain legal immigration status in the U.S. The marriages occurred over an 11-year period and included 7 grooms from countries red-flagged by the Department of Homeland Security, including Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, Georgia, and Mali. If convicted, Barrientos faces up to 4 years in prison. A female Army officer at upstate Fort Drum is set to make history. Captain Michelle Kelly will participate in training through the military's Ranger School. The opportunity comes after the military decided in 2012 to lift its ban of women in combat roles. She will be one of 12 women who have qualified for the elite training that begins later this month at Fort Benning in Georgia. Staff members at a residential facility in northern New York have been charged with covering up an assault of a disabled teen. State authorities say 5 staff members were involved in the incident that left the 18-year-old teen with a head injury, concussion, and seizure. A report released by the U.S. Department of Education today shows the majority of 4-year-olds are not enrolled in publicly funded preschool programs. In New York City, applications for pre-kindergarten close April 24th. Teresa Avila, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Anjali Sastry.
And I'm Alistair Gardner. The White House took a step forward in support of LGBT people this week. On Wednesday night, senior advisor to the president Valerie Jarrett, writing on behalf of Barack Obama, posted a petition on the White House website. It calls for an end to so-called conversion therapy. That's where therapists try to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity.
The petition is motivated in part by the December suicide of Leila Alcorn. She was a 17-year-old transgendered youth who said in a suicide note that she killed herself because her parents forced her into conversion.
I spoke to Dr. Jack Drescher, a psychiatrist who specializes in the mental health of LGBT communities. I asked him about the kind of patients, who are often children, who end up undergoing so-called conversion therapies.
Parents are sending them to see a so-called therapist because the parents are unhappy about the possibility that they might have a gay child. In addition, there are adults, often people who come from religious backgrounds in which they've been taught that homosexuality is a bad thing or a sin, and they come voluntarily on their own to try and change.
So would it be fair to say that typically this is like a segment of the population who might potentially be more emotionally vulnerable, more prone to mental health issues?
This is a very vulnerable population in that, often people who have these feelings of same-sex attractions and who don't want to have them are a desperate group of people because everything they've learned in much of their lives is that this is not the way that they should be. And so they are, in fact, vulnerable to being preyed upon by people who don't really have any treatments that work, because most of the people who try to change their sexual orientation don't change at all.
And so what effect does that have for those who undergo the so-called therapy?
When people start these so-called treatments, what usually happens is the counselor will tell them something like, the success of what we're doing depends on your motivation or your religious faith. So if this works, it's only going to work because you're going to make it work. But since it doesn't work, usually what happens is that the person who tried to make it work feels worse at the end of the treatment because they only blame themselves. And so what you often see is people, when they feel worse when it doesn't work, they get depressed, they get anxious, they may even get suicidal at times.
And, at that point, are there treatments or therapies that they can then turn to sort of de-traumatize them?
Yes, there is certainly help for people who've been traumatized in this way, but one of the problems that these kinds of treatments create is they lead to mistrust of therapists in general. That is, if once you've been to see an incompetent therapist, you may not want to trust another person or put your mental health in the lives of a stranger.
Do you think possibly in the future this is something that's going to be like dying out?
Yes, I do think that it's going to die out. One of the reasons it's been dying out, many of the prominent ex-gays the last 15 years have come out saying that it doesn't work and that most people don't change. And it may look on the short term that somebody has changed, but long term nobody changes. And what's happening, I think, in the communities where people have been sending their family members into these kinds of treatments, they themselves are seeing that people don't change, and they themselves are seeing some of the harm done. So you're having a rapidly growing population of disaffected clients.
So we can sort of be optimistic for the future then?
I would like to be optimistic. I'm a half-glass full kind of psychiatrist.
Dr. Drescher, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Jack Drescher is a New York City-based psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who specializes in gender, sexuality, and the mental health of LGBT communities. His most recent book is called Treating Transgender Children and Adolescents.
A few weeks ago, poet Kenneth Goldsmith walked up to a podium at Brown University and read the autopsy report of Michael Brown, which he downloaded from the internet. Brown was the young black man who was killed by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri last year. Goldsmith read it as a poem.
Kenneth Goldsmith is as public a figure as poets get these days. Immediately after the reading, controversy erupted online. Critics attacked Goldsmith for what they called a racist exploitation of a black man's dead body for conceptual poetics. As Dasha Litsatsina reports, the controversy is about whether words really do matter, or whether they're just ones and zeros on the internet.
Once Duchamp upturned a urinal and put it on a pedestal, then we were given permission to say that anything is art if I say so. And I can see the world as being entirely an artistic project if I say so.
Goldsmith is talking about the moment in 1913 when French artist Marcel Duchamp allegedly exhibited a signed urinal at the prestigious Armory Show in New York. That was the birth of modernist conceptual appropriation as we know it.
Evidence of injury, gunshot wound to the top of the head. Near the apex of the head, centered approximately 4 inches back from the top of the forehead and a half an inch right of the midline, is an entrance gunshot wound measuring 1/4 an inch.
Now, that's not Goldsmith reading Michael Brown's autopsy report. He publicly requested that Brown University not make a recording of his reading public. This is not the first time he's courted controversy. After 9/11, he published a poem called American Deaths and Tragedies that weaves together text of what was broadcast on the airwaves during 7 American tragedies, including the assassination of JFK and 9/11. Goldsmith says all he does is take pre-existing texts and recast them as poetry. Once he read traffic reports to an audience at the White House. But with the Brown reading, some of his critics think he went too far.
I think the poet was rightly criticized.
That's Kembrew McLeod, a professor of communication studies at Iowa University. He's written books on intellectual property and plagiarism as a creative practice. He's also a multimedia collage artist who practices appropriation himself, but McLeod thinks when Goldsmith engaged in this particular piece of cultural appropriation, he was oblivious to the sensitivities it touched.
There is a very important ethical dimension that really needs to be discussed when you have, white people appropriating from either, the music and art of African Americans, or in this particular case, a very tragic circumstance surrounding the death of an African American at the hands of a police officer.
Last week, The New Yorker published a piece Goldsmith wrote on the subject. Appropriation, or plagiarism as a creative practice, is the idea behind Goldsmith's version of what's known as post-internet poetry. One of the things that unites the poets he touts in this piece is their use of crime narratives. One, Vanessa Place, took court transcripts of sex offenders' testimony and published excerpts as poetry. The poet Stephen Zoltansky says he found criminal confessions on the internet and incorporated them into his latest book-length poem, Bribery.
It's not really about crime being an interesting material in and of itself, but it's more about a kind of affect of guilt or an experience of guilt that comes with living complicitly with the world that we're in.
Goldsmith says the internet has shown us that there's already too much text in the world.
It's the way in which we reframe and recast those pre-existing texts that give them a new life and a new meaning.
Kembrew McLeod says the internet has changed the nature of appropriation.
Before, appropriation and collage techniques were limited to a very small select avant-garde, and now it's very much mainstream. And I think these poets are responding to the fact that cut-and-paste culture is very much part of everybody's everyday culture.
In other words, the intellectuals who first practiced written appropriation are trying to claim it back as their own. Dasha Lisitsina, Columbia Radio News.
You don't need to look far beyond last week's headlines to find a story of corruption in New Jersey.
This month, longtime New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez pled not guilty to charges of bribery brought by federal prosecutor Paul Fishman.
Correspondent Tyler Daniels went back to his home state in an attempt to figure out why New Jersey's history, both recent and past, has been so plagued by scandal.
In New Jersey, we've all become accustomed to scenes like this one.
And this is not how my career is going to end. I have always conducted myself in accordance with the law.
A politician, perhaps one we've all voted for, maybe many, many times, standing before the shadows of the courthouse protesting his innocence. In this case, it was Senator Robert Menendez, talking to a group of supporters at what sounded more like a campaign rally than a press conference.
Prosecutors at the Justice Department don't know the difference between friendship and corruption and have chosen to twist my duties as a senator and my friendship into something that is improper.
It's an ever-growing hall of shame. Congressman Rob Andrews, former Newark Mayor Sharp James, former Trenton Mayor Tony Mack, on and on. It's something we've all come to expect warily, a cycle that repeats. New Jersey residents have built up a certain tolerance to political scandal. But why? Why is New Jersey a never-ending state of corruption? According to Brian Murphy, a historian at Baruch College who studied the state's politics for years, the problem begins at the municipal level, and at the county level, and at the board level. If that sounds confusing, that's precisely the problem.
There are so many different layers of government and layers in the approval processes for projects that if you want to do business in the state, you have to make a lot of friends at a lot of different levels of government.
In other words, there are a lot of wheels to grease. County governments, school boards, town councils, planning boards, environmental commissions, all of which have a little bit of power.
New Jersey's political establishment, I think, has become very, very good at seizing on those inefficiencies as a way to extract campaign donations from people who are looking to do business in the state.
For some politicians, then, the question is not what's best for the people I represent, but what can I get away with?
If your legal standard becomes the only standard, you're sort of racing toward the bottom.
This is a regular conference meeting of the Council of the Township of Montclair. Notice of this meeting has provided to the Montclair Times, the Herald News.
I went to Montclair to sit in on a town council meeting. I wanted to ask elected officials and residents about this culture of corruption. I found Robert Russo, currently deputy mayor of Montclair, former mayor, and probable future gubernatorial candidate. I asked him, how easy is it to get caught up in these traps? His response, very easy.
One time I was given a check or a donation by a developer. I returned it in an election way back. And I just said, you're going to come before me. I'm going to be on the planning board. I'm going to be voting. I can't have a potential appearance of conflict, just an appearance.
In a state where corruption is commonplace, the slightest scent of wrongdoing can set off alarms with voters. For Councilwoman Renee Baskerville, one way to help elected officials avoid corruption is to make positions part-time, paid with a modest stipend.
You get a different type of person when people are volunteering, I think. I think that the people that would run here, even in Montclair, would be totally different if they were paid.
In neighboring towns like Newark, council members can make up to $80,000 a year. And Baskerville thinks that can attract people to public service for the wrong reasons. Although Professor Brian Murphy says that part-time officials might also face perverse incentives while in office.
Part of the problem with having part-time officials is that they all have day jobs, and if they have day jobs that can in some way be made to be compatible with their public roles, then you have a similar set of problems.
Murphy says ultimately the solution is transparency from the government and engagement from citizens demanding accountability.
It was a minor matter. I just wanted to strike a share.
Citizens like Frank Rubacki, who spoke up at the meeting last night.
Montclair is a type of community where there's more involvement than a typical community, and I think that helps.
One would hope it helps anyway.
Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye. Tyler Daniels, Columbia Radio News.
The New York State DREAM Act would allow undocumented teens and young adults brought to the United States by their parents to apply for financial aid.
The bill didn't make it to the new state budget, but its supporters aren't giving it up. Reporter Nardos Mesmer has the story.
When the DREAM Act didn't pass, Marisol Santiago was disappointed because she isn't able to get financial aid. She is also disappointed in the politicians who said it would become law.
I think that we are just toys for them. At the end, they're not going to pass it. Why do they even try to put advertisement on it?
Because finances were tight, it took her 8 years to get an associate. Now she's working on getting a bachelor's degree as a part-time student at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She says the financial aid would be a big help. Governor Andrew Cuomo gambled by linking the DREAM Act, which is popular with the Democrats, to an education tax credit, which is popular with the Republicans. The state assembly, which is controlled by Democrats, voted down the tax credit. The Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, defeated the DREAM Act. Cuomo is expected to push for the bill to be reintroduced, but it will face the same opposition from the Senate's Republicans, according to Scott Reef, spokesperson for Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos.
We don't believe that taxpayers should be forced to pick up the cost of free college tuition for illegal immigrants, while hardworking middle-class families take out student loans that will take them years to repay.
Supporters say they'll be bringing the same passion to get the bill passed.
No, we're not giving up, and we won't accept no for an answer.
That's Jackie Vimo of the New York Immigration Coalition. She says supporters of the group will bring the same strategies that failed to win the bill's passage this year.
We're going to keep on working on leadership in both the Assembly and the Senate. We're going to continue to conduct lobby visits to show legislators across the state that there are undocumented immigrants in their district.
But some advocates believe it's time for a new strategy, according to New York Times reporter Liz Robbins. They've been telling her efforts should be focused on getting a large group of potential supporters to line up behind the tax credit.
The next step is to work on the teachers' union to pretty much convince the Democratic lawmakers that a tax credit is something that is important. Now, again, that's also assuming that if this comes around next year, that Governor Cuomo will link them again.
The fight so far has taken a lot out of Marisol Santiago.
And I also have to take time to go to the rallies to help them out. And sometimes I just get tired.
But she says there's too much at stake for her to give up. She's paying taxes but not getting benefits, so she will continue to help get the DREAM Act passed. I'm Nardos Mesmer, Columbia Radio News.
For more than 4 centuries, river herring haven't been able to spawn in the Bronx River. And it's all because of a dam built by Dutch settlers.
But as of today, the herring can come back. A new ladder will allow the fish to climb upstream over the historic dam to calm waters fit for breeding. Cassandra Basler reports.
The Bronx River has been through a lot. After the Dutch built their dams, they built paper mills that began centuries of pollution. Linda Cox is the executive director of the Bronx River Alliance. She says it's been a long time since the river has been fit for fish.
This river was so used for industry since the 1600s that it started getting treated as kind of a sewer a long time ago.
Cox says New York City's only real freshwater river was basically a 20-mile long sewer. The only things swimming in it were cars and tires, and that had consequences.
People maybe sometimes don't think this is really a real river with things like real fish.
Millions of dollars of investment over the past few decades helped clean out the trash and tires, but the wildlife had been slow to return. It got some help this morning. The groups in the Bronx River Alliance came together to unveil what's called a fish ladder, where herring will swim up from the ocean to spawn. From the outside, the ladder looks like a metal slide that snakes up the left side of the dam. The 10-inch long silvery fish will hang out at the mouth of the ladder's opening and enter one by one. The fish flop up from a series of shallow pools built in steps. Mary Larson from the Natural Resources Group at the Parks Department says those little herring don't stop there.
There's a resting pool halfway up the ramp, and they'll turn the corner and sprint up the next section. Then they're going to swim through a tunnel where we count them and past a video recorder where we can video them.
Then herring swim over the dam into calm waters. That's where the magic happens.
They'll meet up and spawn.
That's good because these fish are close to endangered. Jake LaBelle, a researcher at the Wildlife Conservation Society, says the river is clean enough for herring to live in, but people can't fish for them.
Their populations declined so much that we actually put a halt on fishing for them in rivers. You wouldn't want to eat them out of the Bronx River anyways.
Fish researchers like LaBelle are hopeful the Bronx River can help these fish and the animals that eat them make a comeback. This project has taken about 15 years and a lot of collaboration between environmental groups that rallied to clean up the waters. Here, they're all celebrating. Jim Turek from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says This is one of almost 300 fish ladders installed on the East Coast, but it's special because it's in the city. People in his line of work can't wait to catch up.
These are all fish experts that we have here today, in the crowd, so that's a good thing. And we spend a lot of time either learning about fish or going fishing for fish.
Turek says he and his fellow fish experts are looking forward to what's next. This spring, Bronx River Alliance will monitor how many fish make it past the dam. It's planning on installing another ladder a half a mile up the river. Cassandra Basler, Columbia Radio News.
And now, Dasha Litsitsina tells us about her long-lost childhood videos, recently recovered from the depths of a Moscow attic.
I was born in Moscow in 1991, the month after the official collapse of the USSR, the first month they started issuing Russian Federation birth certificates. Daria Pavlovna Lysitsina, baby of collapse and chaos, child of the future. The 90s had a newfound sense of freedom and infinite possibility. But for the moment at least, not a lot had changed. Shelves in stores were empty. Ordinary life did not magically improve. For most of us, that is. But not for one friend of my parents, the son of Soviet bureaucrats, who'd used his status to acquire something completely out of the ordinary, his own personal video camera. This was practically absurd at the time. It's like owning your own personal 3D printer today. The stuff shot on that camera was the only evidence I have of my pre-London life, and until very recently, I'd never seen it. When my parents left Moscow for London with me in 1995, they packed pretty lightly and unsentimentally. Part of the emotional baggage they left behind was a box of photos and videos of me, taken on a much passed around, sacrosanct camera. With my sister's photos adorning the walls of the house I grew up in, I felt almost a bit cheated. My pictures, the images of my childhood, had vanished. My past was dusting in some unknown, godforsaken Moscow attic. But last year, my dad got a call from a friend. Seryoja was clearing out his mother's flat, the one where they used to hang out and listen to black market Beatles records in their acid-wash black market 501 Levi's. And under fading yearbook photos from Pioneer Summer Camp, rows of kids with red neckties and toothpaste dad smiles, he found the box of videotapes. And when I came home for Christmas last year, there it was, a bubble-wrapped cardboard box in our living room marked Caution Fragile. Inside, these tiny video cassette tapes, exotic specimens of analogue technology, little bits of frozen time, waiting to be rewound. Here's one. I'm leaning on a miniature rake and paisley shorts, pretending to help tend to the pumpkin patch outside my grandma's country house. In the background, two lean men are fixing the window of the wooden house. I can't help thinking that the clip looks like propaganda for how to raise a socialist worker child. Maybe it's the grainy quality of the film. Maybe it's the familiar iconography. Homemade vodka, gherkins, the communal vegetable patch. Objectively, the homemade videos are terminally dull to watch. But I was addicted. I guess it was a mixture of narcissism and psychic archaeology. I wondered what my life would have been like had my parents stayed in Moscow. How different I would have been. What I would have been doing now. Last summer, I travelled through Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railway. It was supposed to be a back-to-my-roots type trip, but the result was quite disappointingly the opposite. The psychic landscape of the place, the brutalist Soviet architecture, the days of monotonous, mesmerising forests, the ice cream brands, they felt familiar. But I didn't quite feel a real connection beyond sheer recognition. Though I'd heard and read lots about them, these were not the streets and parks I grew up in. And people, they found it difficult to place me. I was travelling with an English friend, and someone asked me if I was a translator for one of the Spice Girls, who, by the way, are still popular on Siberian radio. My Russian accent was near faultless, but my habits and mannerisms, they gave me away. I said please and thank you and sorry way too much for one thing, a particularly British tic, and my pathetic slang was at least a decade out of date. I ended up feeling more estranged. Perhaps that shouldn't have come as a surprise. The whole trip ended up being an anthropological excursion rather than a pseudo-homecoming. I was just a glorified tourist, looking for a memory that only ever existed on tapes.
Dasha doesn't intend to move back to Moscow anytime soon, but misses London dearly. She's hardly home, but always reppin'. You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Anjali Sastry.
And I'm Alistair Gardner. Uptown Radio is online at uptownradio.org. You can also listen to us on air at WBAI FM every Monday at 5 a.m. Get ready for the second half of the show.
In the last 10 years, peanut allergies have doubled in Western countries, but a new approach could prevent children from getting allergic reactions.
We'll hear how a ladder for fish will allow a newly endangered river herring to once again spawn in the Bronx River.
And a new discovery in the brain could lead to medication that suppresses the urge to binge drink.
All that and many more stories to come, but first, here's the latest news.
For Columbia Radio News in New York, I'm Joe Sykes. President Obama is in Panama preparing for the Summit of the Americas today. There, for the second time only, he'll meet Cuban President Raul Castro. Nardos Mesmer has more.
White House officials confirmed today that Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro spoke by phone on Wednesday. This comes ahead of an event in Panama this weekend when the two will share a stage along with other Latin American leaders. The two heads of state are scheduled to briefly meet at the conference, where Obama is expected to officially announce Cuba's removal from the United States terrorist sponsor list. Ahead of the summit, President Obama visited the Panama Canal, which he called representing important continental cooperation.
It's really a symbol of human ingenuity, but also Panama's central role in bridging the two continents and bringing the hemisphere together.
The summit started today and runs through tomorrow. Nardos Mesmer, Columbia Radio News.
Tornadoes ripped through rural Illinois last night. Governor Bruce Rauner confirmed 2 women had died as a result of the twisters.
From here, we will be going up to Fairdale. That was the community that was most severely impacted by the storms. And unfortunately, very tragically, 2 people lost their lives.
The governor identified the women as 69-year-old Jacqueline K. Closer and 67-year-old Geraldine M. Schultz. Homes across 6 counties in the state are left barely standing, roofs are missing, and metal sidings from barns are wrapped around trees. A 20-year-old Kansas man was arrested and charged with plotting to detonate a suicide bomb at Fort Riley Army Base on behalf of Islamic State terrorists today. U.S. Attorney Barry Grissom said John Thomas Booker Jr. always planned to kill himself.
It's alleged that he told another individual that detonating a suicide bomb was his #1 aspiration because he couldn't be captured, all the evidence would be destroyed, and he would be guaranteed to hit his target.
The arrest was the latest in a series of sting operations aimed at Americans plotting to either launch domestic terror attacks or join ISIL. If convicted, Booker faces life in federal prison. Hillary Clinton will launch her 2016 presidential campaign this Sunday. Sources suggest she'll start small with an announcement on Twitter around noon Eastern Time before posting an online video on social media. While she'll first head to Iowa to begin the long campaign slog, her team will be based in nearby Brooklyn. Reports this week confirmed Clinton has bought up office space in Brooklyn Heights. Clinton is expected to raise even more cash for 2016 than the $1 billion drummed up by Barack Obama in 2012. If Hillary Clinton wants advice on leadership, she'd do well to head down to Orange County this weekend. The Anaheim Central Library will play host to an array of presidents and prime ministers, kings, queens, dukes, and barons. But this is hardly the United Nations. Microcon 2015 is the largest gathering of micronations ever to grace North American shores. Countries like Slobovia, West Arctica, and Vikesland exist, but only in the minds of their citizens, whose numbers range from 1 to around 1,000. Saturday's event is being billed as a micronational get-together and activity. US stocks are ending with solid gains today, giving the market its second weekly advance in a row. The Dow rose 98 points, or 0.6% to 18,057, Bond prices rose. The yield on the 10-year Treasury note fell to 1.95%. Joe Sykes, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. We're live on uptownradio.org, and you can listen to us on WBAI on Mondays at 5 a.m. I'm Alistair Gardner.
And I'm Anjali Sastry.
A familiar story unfolded in South Carolina last Saturday. A white police officer stopped a black man in a routine violation. Moments later, the driver was dead, and the officer's gun had been discharged. But this time, there was video evidence.
That's reported to be the sound of shots from the gun of Officer Michael Slager. He's been charged with the killing of Walter Scott, a 50-year-old father of 4 in North Charleston, South Carolina. A passerby shot the video on his phone. But there's another video that came out this week. It was taken from the dashboard of the officer's car.
Let us see the car.
This video shows Scott getting out of the car and fleeing his vehicle. What you don't hear are gunshots.
In New York this week, Mayor Bill de Blasio said he wants the police to wear body cameras while they're on duty so that there's evidence when an incident is disputed.
We've seen these painful moments captured on individual citizens' cell phone cameras. We are going to move more and more to a society where the cameras are on police officers for the good of all.
I spoke to Babe Howell, who teaches criminal law at the City University of New York. She says even a body cam wouldn't have provided conclusive evidence in the South Carolina incident.
When the officer gets close to Mr. Scott, and we don't know what happened at that moment, but that is going to appear on a video as kind of a split-second confusing moment, you are not going to be able to tell what happened, and it will still be very much up to the police officer to say, in that moment, he was grabbing something. Because the hand would might disappear or not be visible. So it still is really a question of the police officer interpreting what is seen on the body cam. And in many of these cases, like, who's going to review each and every last one of these videos? It will really be up to citizens to seek accountability, to make complaints when there's inappropriate policing. And then the videos will be helpful, but they will not cure the problem.
So technically, it is legal to film police on their beats in all 50 states, but do the lines get blurred when some people record policemen?
They don't get blurred as to the legality. It is legal, but the police will often treat it as illegal, as an affront to the police. There's this concept called contempt of cop. They expect you to do what they want you to do and comply, and filming them as they conduct an arrest or a search or a stop is something that they will often respond poorly to. And it is very easy for them, if they know you're recording, to take your recording instrument, delete or destroy it, and then control the story of what actually happened.
So police officers are under a lot of stress. Do you think they have a right not to be watched all the time?
I don't think anyone can assume that right anymore. I certainly think that when they're, going to the bathroom or things like that they should be able to turn off cameras. But other than that, when we're in a public street, in a public place, when we're conducting public functions, none of us have the right or even the expectation anymore that other people won't see what we're doing, and that they would be able to record it. That it's a kind of mass surveillance world now. So it's going to be part of the job, and they need to be trained to deal with that part of the job as professionally as we hope that they deal with every other part of the job.
I really appreciate you talking with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Babe Howell teaches criminal law at CUNY School of Law and is a former criminal defense attorney in New York City.
The murder of Walter Scott raises the question, should police officers be wearing cameras? The New York Police Department announced today that it will send 8 officers to Los Angeles to study how police body cameras are being used there.
And across the country, activists are preparing for a nationwide rally on Tuesday. Here in New York, reporter Ariel Richin went to talk to people about what happens next.
At New York Law School this morning, more than 150 people gathered for a speech by City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito.
Good morning, everybody. Buenos días.
She called for criminal justice reforms, like the creation of a citywide bail fund, to help low-income defendants afford bail. She also said that something needs to be done to improve community-police relations.
Which is one of the reasons why we're also asking for an expanded police force so we can do true community policing.
She says key to that would be adding 1,000 more officers, something Mayor de Blasio hasn't committed to.
This must stop! This must stop!
8 blocks south, a group of activists are gathered on the steps of City Hall. Nicholas Hayward says he's one of them, and he isn't convinced of the council speaker's plan.
1,000 more cops is not what's needed in New York City. What is needed in New York City is to have more opportunities inside these poor minority communities of color.
He's been on this quest in the name of his son, Nicholas Jr. In 1994, he was shot and killed by a police officer who mistook his toy gun for a real one.
He was murdered when he was 13, he had his whole life in front of him.
That's why Hayward's out here today with a group of other activists.
Just to see this happening over and over again, it just creates more pain, because it's like it never ends.
For the protesters here, this is all personal. They're planning a nationwide march, encouraging people to skip out on work and school and instead flood public spaces. Walter Scott's death in South Carolina, captured on video, has reignited the national debate on police brutality. The policeman, charged with murder, is a white man named Michael Slager.
This white guy is in jail, and all they talk about is his pregnant wife.
That's Iris Baez. Her son was choked and killed by a police officer in 1994. The officer was charged with criminally negligent homicide and served 7 years.
Our loss mean nothing because our children was murdered by police.
Hawa Ba carries a poster of her hugging her son Muhammad. He was killed by police in 2012 after his call for an ambulance ended in a standoff in his apartment.
Muhammad so loved me. I love him all the time. He was a baby. I'm away. I never see Muhammad child.
With the other activists, Ba has been helping to plan Tuesday's march for months, with people like Hayward.
April 14th, shut down schools, shut down stores nationally.
They say no more business as usual. They're even trying to shut down major roads. Protests have been planned all over the country. Ariel Richin, Columbia Radio News.
Deciding what to feed your child can be confusing for parents, especially when it comes to food allergies. In the last 10 years, the number of kids who are allergic to peanuts have doubled in Western countries.
After years of telling parents to avoid feeding kids peanuts, scientists are now recommending exposing infants to peanuts early on. As Miriam Sitz reports, for many, it will dramatically reduce their chances of becoming allergic later on in life.
When Carlin Kolker's son Caleb was almost 2 years old, he accidentally ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Accidentally because his parents were being cautious, not giving him peanuts so young. It was December of 2010.
A couple minutes later, we noticed that Caleb's lip was swelling up. And pretty soon after that, he was covered in hives, head to toe, and wound up spending Christmas Eve at the emergency room.
She was terrified, but also confused.
This is sort of absurd of me, but I thought, we don't have food allergies. Like, this can't be.
Now, the 6-year-old carries an EpiPen with him at all times. Before sleepovers and parties, Kolker sends a detailed note about what he can and can't eat. It's on their minds all the time. But for the last year, he's been a part of a clinical trial at Mount Sinai, where he actually eats small, increasing amounts of peanut flour on purpose, the very thing that makes him sick.
Does it taste like anything to you?
No, it just tastes like applesauce.
Yeah, because you mix it in your applesauce?
Yeah.
They visit the hospital every 2 weeks, schlepping from Windsor Terrace to the Upper East Side to get tested and pick up a new supply of flour capsules. Mixed into his food, he eats it
every day at nighttime, except for the day I go to Mount Sinai.
Scott Sicherer is a professor of pediatrics at Mount Sinai and former head of the American Academy of Pediatrics Allergy and Immunology Committee. He explains that by giving Caleb small amounts of peanut flour, the hope is
to get the body essentially used to the food that it's allergic to and to try to change the immune response.
But the recommendations on when to introduce peanuts have been changing wildly. In 2000, the Academy recommended no peanuts for kids younger than 3. In 2008, they modified that stance, saying exposure was probably okay. Then in February, it all changed again.
The study that just came out is called the LEAP study.
LEAP stands for Learning Early About Peanuts.
It was a well-done study. It was a large study, and there really seemed to be a benefit to this early eating of peanuts.
It showed that healthy kids who don't have a diagnosed allergy really should eat peanut products when they're very young. And the study came about because of a snack. There's nothing like Bamba, the jingle says. In Israel, the puffed corn and peanut snack is as ubiquitous as Cheerios. But researchers noted that peanut allergies are 10 times as high among Jewish kids in the UK as they are in Israel. The LEAP study watched about 640 babies less than a year old who had other allergies, put into two groups. Half ate peanut products like Bamba several times a week, and half waited until age 5. The Bamba babies ended up with a lot fewer peanut allergies.
And they saw that there was an 80% reduction in the risk of developing peanut allergies by this very simple intervention.
That's Manish Ramesh, assistant professor of medicine and director of the food allergy group at the Montefiore Medical Center. So now the advice is to give healthy kids peanut products when they're young, really young, like under a year, to prevent allergies.
We decided that this is actually almost like a public health thing. It's almost as if we were vaccinating kids against measles. In the same way, we are essentially preventing the development of an allergy by a very simple intervention.
So they've set up a program to test and then expose kids to peanuts in a medically supervised setting. Similar to the LEAP study, the Montefiore program targets kids who have eczema or are allergic to milk or egg. Those things indicate a high risk of later peanut allergy. On the day I called, they were just ready to take their first appointments.
We just confirmed that we have the call system in place as of today.
And time is of the essence. This has only been proven to work in very young children during a narrow developmental window. And though many in the study didn't develop an allergy after regular exposure, some still did. It's not a foolproof plan. Even so, Ramesh seems urgent. He says the pros outweigh the cons.
This early intervention, which is relatively low risk, might be better than waiting to see what happens after 5 or 6 years when the child has already developed a peanut allergy.
At 6 years old, Caleb is too late for this kind of preventive treatment. But in his study, he's shown progress.
What do you hope to happen from the clinical trial?
For my peanut allergy to go away. A little.
A little.
Or as much as it can.
Parents who are interested in a peanut screening can make an appointment with Montefiore in Scarsdale or in the Bronx. Miriam Sitz, Columbia Radio News.
So, no surprises here. Binge drinking alcohol is bad. Nearly 90,000 people die each year from excessive drinking.
Ariana Skybell reports on a recent discovery in the brains of mice that could provide a new treatment that curbs the urge to binge. We begin at the scene of the crime, a bar.
It's a Saturday night at Jake's Dilemma, a bar on 81st in Amsterdam, known for its $4 shots and sticky floors. It's the kind of bar you go to for one reason, to get trashed. James Meyer is splitting a pitcher of beer with a friend. He loves drinking.
I enjoy it quite a bit, yeah. It might be one of my favorite things to do.
And he drinks often.
Not more than once a night.
But sometimes he will have as many as 8 drinks.
I just turned 30, so 8's pretty much the top for me. Maybe 10.
The CDC defines binge drinking as 5 or more drinks for a man and 4 or more drinks for a woman in a 2-hour period. Though he drinks every night, Meyer says he's not the guy with a real drinking problem.
I'm more the guy that gets right to the point of drunk and stops drinking every night, so I'm never going to hit rock bottom.
At 30 now, Meyer is not yet at the age when people binge drink the most. That's actually men ages 35 to 65, not the college students that so often make headlines. Still, what Meyer doesn't know is that when he drinks like a fish, he's actually drinking a lot more like a mouse.
They will binge drink alcohol to very high levels.
Thomas Cash is a neuroscientist who studies the effects of binge drinking on mice, who are apparently little drunkards.
Their blood alcohol levels will get up to 0.14 BAC, blood alcohol concentration. Whereas, if a person had a blood alcohol of 0.14, they would be very, very, very intoxicated.
Mice just don't know when to stop, making them great subjects for Cash and his team at the University of North Carolina to study the binge-drinking brain. They found that the desire to binge drink lies in the amygdala, the walnut-shaped part in the middle of the brain that controls emotions. Moderate drinking lights up the part of the amygdala that responds to pleasure. But Cash and his collaborators found that binge drinking seems to be compelled by something less pleasurable.
Essentially, what we think is happening is that with binge drinking, we're engaging some of this stress-related circuitry, and that's helping to drive this behavior.
Now, Cash and his team think they may have found an off switch. It's a two-step process. First, they inject a virus deep into the brain of a drunk mouse. This primes a receptor. Next, Cash injects the mouse with a naturally occurring protein called neuropeptide Y, which activates the receptor.
That activation of that receptor serves to turn off these cells, or kind of turn them down, you might say. Essentially, what we showed is if we shut down a different population of cells in this brain region, we could shut down or turn binge drinking into a more innocuous type behavior.
These hardcore binge-drinking mice are turned into more casual, one glass of wine with dinner types. If Cash and his team can replicate these findings in humans, that would be huge.
We have a very specific place in the brain that we know is altered in alcoholics, and we have a very specific protein, and we know very specifically how it works. In that sense, it is a very critical door being opened to studying alcohol abuse.
Binge drinking is a big problem in this country. More than half of the alcohol consumed by adults in the U.S. is in the form of binge drinks. Drinking that much, even occasionally, can cause stroke, heart disease, cancer, and a whole host of other health issues. Stopping binge drinking can take more than just willpower.
Increasingly, we're looking to pharmaceutical interventions that work.
Emily Feinstein is the director of Columbia's Addiction and Substance Abuse Center. She says alcohol and substance abuse disorders are the most preventable causes of death in the U.S.
They cost more and take more lives than cancer, diabetes, and other health conditions, and we need more treatments that are effective and easily accessible.
But even if we do come up with more treatments, Feinstein says not every drug works for every person. And
there's a compliance factor. For some of these drugs, you have to take the drug yourself every day.
Not everyone is willing to do that. Back at Jake's Dilemma, James Meyer and his friend have finished their pitcher. Time for another round. Meyer says even if there was a pill to curb his desire to binge drink, he wouldn't take it.
Will it get me drunk?
No.
Well, absolutely not then. No, that seems silly and useless. That sounds like a medication for wanting to have sex. That's the opposite of Viagra. I don't want that. I want to have sex.
But even if Meyer changes his mind, it's going to take a long time before Cash's research moves from a mouse's brain to a human brain. Ariana Skybell, Columbia Radio News.
Today, Apple released its first new product line in 5 years, the Apple Watch.
It's not the first smartwatch on the wearable technology market, but some analysts say it could be the one that changes the game. Reporter Paula Lem joined customers trying it on for the first time.
Under Grand Central's domed ceiling, a small crowd races up the stairs like marathoners after the first gun. They're Apple customers, and they're hungry for the company's latest release, Apple's high-tech watch.
I want this more than you do.
Scott Briefer's raring to go. He's an analyst and app developer for IBM.
I have been a fanboy and supporter for many, many years, and I actually have one of the original Macs, going back into 1984, I think, or 83.
But the race isn't on just yet. The only people taking it out of the store today had to pre-order the watch early this morning. And that means today's crowd is a bit smaller than at other Apple releases.
Usually when Apple is showing a product for the very first time, the lines, that corridor over there, where it says Track 23, is filled with lines of people back and forth, and it can be hours before you would actually get upstairs.
Today, only a couple dozen people were waiting for the store to open.
What does that say? That may be the price, it may be the whole idea that wearables is not really as exciting to the demographic as us analysts predict.
Today, only a couple dozen people were waiting for the store to open. We're in sight of Grand Central's iconic gold clock. But at the Apple Store, more customers keep coming in to try out a whole other kind of timepiece. One by one, they check in with a salesperson.
Druin is the last name, D-R-O-U-I-N.
Zach Druin's a self-described tech nerd. He's taking out Apple's watch for a spin.
Which hand do you prefer?
On my left.
On your left, perfect. Do you prefer the
I guess I don't know yet, so maybe...
The saleswoman pulls out a drawer full of watches. They've got square faces and a sleek, modern look. And they come in 2 sizes. The watch already sold out online, but Druin's ahead of the game.
I already pre-ordered a 42mm this morning.
That's the larger of 2 options. Druin's main reason for getting it? It's an easy way to stay on top of all those text messages. After Apple's iPhone came out, watch sales took a hit, with more people looking to their phone for the time. But now, the watch is becoming the new phone. At least, that's what Apple's hoping. Ryan Shaughnessy isn't getting a new watch. He's just here because his friend is buying one.
So I'm someone who's constantly checking my phone. I pull it out of my pocket.
Plus, he's already got a watch, the regular kind. And he's not the only traditionalist around.
I don't need constant reminders of emails and texts popping up on my wrist.
The stores selling the world's most exclusive timepieces are clustered around Grand Central Station. All the big players are here. Rolex, Tag Heuer, Tourneau. The Tissot flagship is just a few blocks up from the Apple Store. Emmanuel Hamoy doesn't just sell watches. He's something of an aficionado.
Today I'm wearing a T-Tempo classic watch. It has sapphire crystal stainless steel bracelet with a black face.
At the moment, he's not too worried about the competition.
Well, we sell mid-price watches with very high-quality Swiss movements. I don't really go for technological hype.
Hype or not, it's a big moment for the watch industry. Apple's new watch will be sold in stores on April 24th, and more people buying it could mean luxury watches go back into fashion. Or this might be their final hour. And only time will tell. Paula Lem, Columbia Radio News.
The yellow taxicab is as iconic to New York City as the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building.
But now, the city's taxis are losing business to the ride-sharing startup Uber. Because unlike regular taxi drivers, Uber drivers don't need a medallion from the Taxi and Limousine Commission to operate. And a medallion usually costs around $800,000.
Early last week, a group of taxi drivers and companies filed a lawsuit against the city, claiming the TLC is allowing Uber to operate illegally. My co-host, Alistair Gardner, reports on the changes in what used to be one of the city's most steadfast industries.
If you head to East 28th Street at around 8 p.m, you'll find yourself surrounded by rows of yellow taxicabs, all with their lights off. It's where cabbies from all over the city come for a good meal and conversation. And tonight, everyone is talking about Uber. Uber arrived in the city in 2011, and just 4 years later, there are more Uber drivers on New York City roads than yellow cabs. Masoud Duran has been driving a taxi for more than a decade. I ask him how Uber has affected his business in the past few years.
It affected a lot. It's about 40% business is gone to Uber now.
And it's not just the customers that the yellow taxi trade is losing. Many of the drivers are making the move to Uber too.
Most of them, yeah. Like, people getting opportunity, they are moving it because there is less expense. If they buy cars, they have their own cars and flexible schedule.
It's easy to see why a cabbie who's losing business would choose to start driving with Uber. You can be making just as much money, but you're under a lot less regulation. According to yellow cab advocates, that's precisely the problem. Last week, a group of taxi companies filed a lawsuit against the city. Similar lawsuits have been filed in Boston, Portland, and San Francisco in the past couple of months. Eric Hecker is the attorney representing the coalition of taxi drivers, fleet owners, and leasing agents in the lawsuit. According to Hecker, the New York City taxi industry has a long-established system of laws and regulations.
And Uber has upset that system by enabling black cars who have not invested in medallions and are not licensed as yellow taxis to pick up hails.
But the lawsuit, Hecker explains, is primarily an issue of money.
Well, it's economic disaster for yellow taxis, and it's for a simple reason. It's that Uber is competing unfairly.
How so? Well, Uber isn't required to use a dispatcher, for example, while all other cab companies are. Uber drivers can use GPS technology to measure the distance of a ride to calculate the fare. Taxis cannot. But Josh Murr, general manager of Uber's New York office, dismisses these claims of competitive advantage. Uber, he argues, is no different than a black car service, which can be requested by phone but not hailed on the street.
And we said, we're going to operate it in that part of the industry using an app. And we met with the TLC, and they explained, we would like you to own a base license, which we quickly did. And we've been operating within the laws of the TLC ever since.
And Murr notes of Uber drivers.
In New York City, every single driver has a TLC license. They have a car that's commercially insured, just like taxis.
He has his own take on the lawsuit.
So I think what you're seeing there is medallion owners frustrated that there's a competitor in an industry that's been really has really had no competitor for decades.
We can expect a decision from the court by the summer. In the meantime, however, Uber will continue to attract customers and drivers alike. Back on 28th Street, Masood is thinking about his future. Will he drive for Uber? Well, he won't rule it out.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Alistair Gardner, Columbia Radio News.
It's too cold in the winter, too hot in the summer, but spring break may possibly be the worst time in New York City because it's overrun with Midwestern tourists.
Cassandra Basler remembers being one of those obnoxious middle school students racing her best friend Erin up the city sidewalks.
In 6th grade, she was edgy with her pixie cut and neon-colored braces. I was preppy with my wire-rimmed glasses and glittery t-shirts. We ate lunch together a few times, laughed at each other's jokes. I thought things were going great. Then she told me that when we first met, she thought I was a huge bitch. You just don't hear that kind of honesty very often. Naturally, we became best friends. The next spring, Erin invited me to visit her grandpa in New York City. She made it sound like that's where real life happens. Like Erin, New York was blunt. Nothing like the buttoned-up Detroit suburb where we lived. As she told it, New York was full of giant rats, guitar-slinging buskers, and shops selling Converse in every color. We sat on her grandpa's stoop in Astoria, ate bagels, people watched. We spent a whole day walking through the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We went record shopping in the Village for CDs, and I even tried Thai food for the first time. I could see why Erin couldn't wait to move here. She was a dancer. I figured she'd be on Broadway by the time we graduated high school. Plus, she was the adventurous one. I tagged along. Like that summer, Erin went to Belize to study marine biology. I stayed home and finished our readings for honors English. She went to a national dance competition at Myrtle Beach. I went to a yearbook editors conference a half hour away in Ypsilanti. When we graduated, to my surprise, we both stayed in Michigan, not just for undergrad, but after too. Neither of us knew our next move, so I couldn't just follow Erin's lead. I moved to Detroit, worked a bunch of part-time jobs. Erin settled into a real full-time position. She seemed on the fast track to adulthood, and I needed to catch up. But not in Detroit, in New York City. I applied to Columbia. I got in, and suddenly it was me plotting a grand adventure. But even a decade after our first trip, New York was still Erin's city to me. So when I needed to go check out Columbia, she drove out with me. She talked me down when I locked myself out of the car at a rest stop in Pennsylvania. She helped me navigate from Astoria to the Upper West Side. Together, we walked past Low Library, and we both felt how far we'd come. I never thought I'd move here, let alone beat Erin to it, but she won't be far behind. Erin's starting her master's in environmental science at Columbia in May. So watch out, New York. There's going to be some Midwesterners racing up your sidewalks again.
Erin Quittel is moving to New York City just in time for Cassandra's graduation dinner, but it won't be Thai food.
That concludes this edition of Uptown Radio. Thanks for tuning in.
Charlotte Gibson steered the ship as the executive producer. Senior producer Hava Gurari made sure that everything sounded great on air.
Conductor Miriam Sitz directed the studio orchestra with Adelie Ponte and Ariana Skybell.
Senior editor Gregoire Moll and Hannah Klingberg were the wordsmiths who fused our scripts today.
We made it onto the internet thanks to Camille Von Cannell and Tyna Daniels.
Kudos to our awesome reporters who brought us the stories you heard this week.
Special thanks to our leaders, the great and powerful Kerry Donahue, Danielle Alagon, and Britt Carr, and John Dingus. I'm Alistair Gardner.
And I'm Anjali Sastry. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4 p.m. and on WBAI Mondays at 5 a.m. You can download our podcast and find us online at uptownradio.org. Have a great weekend, folks.